Hi, I'm Reiner Benowitz, and this is part 1 of producing educational lecture videos using PowerPoint, OBS Studio, and Adobe Premiere Pro. In this video, we'll be conducting an overview of the entire process, as well as discussing the preparation of content using PowerPoint. Let's start with an overview of this video series. Here in part 1, I'm going to talk about my process for preparing educational content using PowerPoint. In part 2, I'm going to cover the basics of hardware and software that I like to use for recording and editing. In part 3, we're going to focus on recording using OBS Studio. And in part 4, we're going to talk about editing and exporting using Adobe Premiere Pro. And lastly, part 5 will cover posting this video on YouTube. As a researcher and educator, when I went to start assembling my most recent video series, I discovered that a lot of the information I needed in terms of how to go about it in an effective and efficient way was distributed across a number of sources and wasn't necessarily geared towards my own needs. So let me start by talking about my own goals for developing the videos that I've produced so far. I wanted to create videos in order to preserve and share my course or lecture content in a way that was easily accessible. And at the same time, I wanted to develop educational resources for students, staff, collaborators, and other researchers or professionals. Also, in creating videos that get posted to YouTube, this serves as an indirect professional networking at both the national and international level. And lastly, the method that I decided to go about in making these videos was chosen in order to make as high a quality of a video product as possible given my own limitations of time and resources. So let me start by giving you a bird's eye view of the entire production process. First, we're going to talk a little about the input hardware and the software, in this case, PowerPoint, that we're using to create the lecture. At its core, all we need is a microphone, a webcam, and the PowerPoint software itself. Next, we have the recording phase. And here I'm going to use free software called OBS Studio. As an output of OBS Studio, we're going to get a video that includes the slides, as well as the webcam feed that you can see here, as well as the audio for the recording. Additionally, for your final video, you might want to include some other video clips, such as an introductory graphic, and perhaps some background music either at the beginning, the end, or even during your presentation. Next, we have editing, and here I'm using Adobe Premiere Pro. One of the things I'll cover are the key audio and video effects that I've used in order to make a little bit more of a customized and polished product. And lastly, we'll talk about exporting and finally posting our video to YouTube. Throughout, I'm going to be covering all the steps I've used and as many of the technical details as possible in order for you to more easily replicate the process I've used or customize it to your own needs. Diving in, let's talk about preparing your content. So the first question you might reasonably have is, why have I chosen PowerPoint? You might be asking this because it's pretty widely known that PowerPoint is easy to use badly. You might have even seen articles like this, pointing out that PowerPoint can actually deter from our ability to effectively communicate in lectures and talks. And these are perfectly reasonable points, and something you should certainly pay attention to as you're thinking about how to best communicate whatever it is you're trying to teach. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to tell you why I'm still using PowerPoint. First off, as an educator, it's easy to organize your thoughts and content ahead of time. It also allows you to pretty easily recycle content for other future presentations. Also, when I'm using PowerPoint, I'm often developing the slides both as a high-level presentation, but also as a slideshow that documents details for students and other viewers to go and follow up on later. It's also really easy to share your content as PowerPoint slides. Of note, you can do many of the key things that we're going to cover in this video just within PowerPoint alone, including basic recording, some very simple editing, and exporting your final video. It is really convenient if you want to record a lecture quickly, but there are trade-offs. Alright, so the first thing you might want to think about is selecting or creating your PowerPoint template. PowerPoint itself offers some options you can choose from, or you might need to use some institutionally approved PowerPoint template. Alternatively, you can create your own PowerPoint template from scratch or by modifying some other template. Here you need to think about things like the size of your slides, in other words, standard, widescreen, or other. You want to create the theme of your slides, including customizing colors, fonts, or effects. And you'll want to set up the overall slide templates using SlideMaster. For more details on how to create a PowerPoint template, you can check out this link. Notably, in this video's description, I'll include all links that I mentioned in this talk. So for these videos, I've actually used a PowerPoint template taken from my institution as a guide. But I've made a number of tweaks to it, including the theme and other adjustments in SlideMaster, such as removing their logo, to create something unique that I could use in my online presentations. Here are some basic suggestions for your PowerPoint template. First off, keep it simple. Avoid distracting colors or background graphics, and make sure your slides reserve some dedicated space at the top for the header, which I like to use to capture the topic of each slide. I also like to reserve dedicated space at the bottom of the slide as a footer for either logos, contact information, citations, links, and/or the slide number. You should also consider ahead of time if you want to dedicate some space on your slide to wherever you're going to place your webcam footage, so that if you want your webcam to be visible throughout the talk, it's not going to be covering up some important content. Additionally, I prefer to use a white background. I know that everyone has their own personal taste here, but I found it's less likely to create downstream hassles when I'm adding images, since a lot of images naturally have a white background. Furthermore, I'd avoid using text fonts smaller than 11, and a size of 14 or larger would be ideal. The next step I use in preparing my slides is to create an outline of the content. Here's an outline of the educational video I'm creating and using in this video as an example. And basically here you want to determine what content you want to include and in what order. This doesn't need to be perfect, it's just a starting point to get going. This is also a great chance to reflect on your teaching goals and figure out how to best communicate your information. As you're creating the outline, you can also make note of some key details you want to make sure that you punch home. Next up, I gather the content I want to include in some draft slides. Often I'll outline my PowerPoint talk by creating a bunch of empty slides that are organized by the titles I want to include for each slide. Along the way, I'll also add content like draft text, images, videos, links, or anything I might want to include in these draft slides. While you're doing this, it's a good time to also make note of the sources of your content that I aim to include in the footer of slides with that kind of content. Again, it's okay to be messy at this stage. I'd recommend not wasting your time with specific formatting or animations or transitions until you have a better idea of what content is going to go in your final slide deck. Also, it's good to avoid using low-resolution images, and I strongly recommend you avoid unnecessary graphics or cartoons. Alright, now let's talk about creating your slides. Here we're going to basically update our draft slides, making sure our slides are organized and presented clearly. If you have a slide that has too much content, consider splitting it into more than one. Here, you also make sure that your images are positioned and sized correctly, according to your needs. I often like to use PowerPoint to make schematics or flowcharts to more effectively communicate complex or multi-step processes. Here, you also want to make sure that you have the correct links and references in the footers of slides that require them. Often when I'm creating my slides, I find that I want to rearrange their order to improve the overall clarity of the talk. Also, to the presentation as a whole, I like to add a title slide, often an introduction slide, in other words, who is the presenter, who is this content for, and what prerequisites might the audience need to understand the material. Then I usually have an outline of the sections of the talk. And further, throughout the talk, I like to include slides that clearly delimit different sections of the talk. You'll see this in the layout of the slides I've used in this video as well. And lastly, my last slide is usually some ending or acknowledgement slide that includes relevant information and links. Briefly, here are some other suggestions for content in slides. I'd recommend using bullet points with content organized appropriately with indent hierarchies. It's also always a good tip to keep text on slides as limited as possible. Having 0 to 10 words on a slide is often ideal for pure oral presentations. Here, the slides are just a vehicle for the presenter to communicate, and they're generally relying on images or figures or brief headlines in order to effectively communicate an idea, or to get viewers interested in learning more elsewhere. More often than not, on my slides, there's usually around 30 to 80 words per slide. This can be justified, especially if you're using the slides to double as reference material for students. So here, slides can document content. However, the thing you want to avoid is reading content from slides directly. In other words, the text on a slide should certainly not be a transcript of the dialogue you're about to speak. And of course, your audience has trouble paying attention to what you're saying while they're trying to read a lot of text on a slide. Next, stay consistent. And I mean this in terms of your use of color, font, text size, underlines, text bolding, or really anything else. Try to stick to a single presentation style to avoid distraction. And of course, in keeping the text on your slide to a minimum, you don't always need to worry about having correct grammar or correct punctuation. Now, what about slide animations and slide transitions? On the topic of animations, I'd recommend using these to make content appear in sequence rather than all content on your slide appearing at once. This can help draw in the viewer's attention and not overwhelm them at the beginning of each slide. I'd also recommend avoiding distracting animations. In other words, just stick to appear or disappear whenever possible. I'd only use some kind of movement animation if it serves a very specific learning goal. Also, when setting up animations, ensure that all content on the slide is viewable when you're going to print it out, such as printing out the slide deck as a handout for students. On the topic of slide transitions, if you're giving a talk, I'd stick to none or a simple fade transition. But when it comes to recording a PowerPoint slideshow as a talk, I just stick to none because you can still add transitions downstream in editing. And you want to make sure that when you capture your slide transitions, the quality of that capture is good. And that can very much rely on the frame rate of your capture. So to avoid downstream problems, I just recommend not having slide transitions when you prepare your slideshow to record it as a video. Alright, so now you're ready to polish your slides. Here, take the time to go back and try to minimize text as much as possible. Try to use brief, punchy bullet points, and move any extra text that you just want as a reference for yourself as a speaker to the slide notes. Also, double check that your images or text in those images is big enough for the audience to see clearly. And I recommend walking through your slides using slideshow mode to ensure that your content, transitions, and animations are all correct and consistent. Alright, so now we're going to assume that your slides are done, and let's talk about scripting your dialogue. Now this is optional as you might already be a really great speaker. I myself am pretty comfortable giving talks in person. However, I found that when I'm recording in front of a camera, I often find myself at a loss for the right words. Personally, I found it useful when recording a video lecture to have some or all of the dialogue scripted ahead of time. Notably for this video, I actually haven't scripted the dialogue ahead of time, so I'm sure it's taking me a lot of takes to get this right. So what are the advantages of scripting? Well, in general, you're going to get a clearer, tighter, and better thought out presentation. It gives you the opportunity to make sure that you've thought through everything that you want to say in your talk. Also, during the recording process, it allows you to focus on your pace and voice dynamics. This can help you avoid recording a talk that ends up sounding a little dull or monotone. And also, in my own experience, I found that scripting makes recording and editing easier overall downstream. Of course, the disadvantages to scripting includes the fact that it takes a lot more time upfront to prepare for your recording. Also, it is possible that your recorded presentation can end up sounding more scripted and less natural. At this point, we've prepared our PowerPoint slideshow and perhaps scripted what we're going to say later within the respective slide notes. As a quick example, I'm going to show you the slides and dialogue that I prepared for a new educational talk that I'm about to record. So let's open up the PowerPoint slides first, and we've got the dialogue beneath each slide. I actually like to prepare my dialogue for the talk ahead of time in Microsoft Office so that I have it as a full script for the entire talk. Here we have the dialogue spaced out into sections representing each slide. Getting back to the slides, let's take a quick look through them so you can get an idea of what I'm shooting for. You can see that they tend to be more image heavy, with text minimized as much as possible. And I'm ending with a slide with some basic information. Thanks for watching part 1 of producing educational lecture videos using PowerPoint, OBS Studio, and Adobe Premiere Pro. In our next video, we're going to cover hardware and software for recording and editing. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to follow my future content.